You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror columnist Susie Boniface and the Sun on Sunday's political editor Kate Ferguson. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Eye describes the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng as betting the UK economy on tax cuts in the wake of his mini-budget. According to the Financial Times, the announcements propelled the pound to its lowest level against the US dollar for 37 years. The gambling metaphor continues on the front of the Telegraph. The Times calls the policy's Truss's great tax gamble. The Mail is full of praise, proclaiming, at last, a true Tory tax cut. The Express likes it too, quoting Mr Kwarteng, saying the government has the courage to bet big on Britain. But The Guardian is blunt in its assessment, branding it a budget for the rich. And in other news, The Sun carries claims about the Duchess of Sussex. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Susie Boniface and Kate Ferguson. Welcome to you both. Let us start with the Eye and their front page. Pound plunges after Kwarteng bets UK economy on tax cuts. Tax cuts galore, it seems, Susie.
Yeah, and the Eye is actually one of the more balanced front pages. So obviously you've got papers that are pro-Tory and papers that are not so Tory, but even those that sort of are one side or the other, that they are reporting the fact that there's big tax cuts and that the markets aren't happy about it. There's one or two of slightly more unhinged papers that aren't even mentioning the other side of things. But the Eye's been quite balanced about it. So, you know, fundamentally what's happened is that Kwasi Kwarteng has come out and said, I'm going to cut everybody's taxes. I'm going to cut the rich people's taxes more than the poor people's, but I'm going to cut everybody's taxes and I'm going to pay for it by borrowing money. And I'm going to borrow that money with taxpayer taxes in the future. And I'm going to do it at a time when it's more expensive to borrow than it has been for a very long time. So that's why the markets have taken fright and gone, what? Because it's all very well cutting taxes and having a huge fiscal stimulus to drive growth if the economy's in the right place for growth. But when you've got inflation that is so volatile, we don't know how much it's going to cost us to get the bus tomorrow, or fill up the tank, or go to the supermarket and do the weekly shop. We have no idea how much our energy bills are going to cost us from one week to the next. That's not the time to throw a big load of money into the economy and say, woo, spend it, everybody, because that's only going to make things worse. It's going to bed in a lot of that inflation for the longer term. Have to wait and see what happens, of course. If it comes off, Kwasi Kwarteng will be the Conservatives' Chancellor of the best one in history as far as they're concerned, and the great gambler and all the rest of it, and the genius who made it all come off. But it does look like there's an awful lot of people on the Conservative backbenches tonight who are, shall we say, less optimistic about that possibility.
Yes, Kate, but the defence from the Chancellor is that it is this dash for growth, and that is basically what the ultimate pursuit is of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've called it a mini budget. It's not. It's a gigantic budget full of tax cuts, as you point out, all bankrolled by extra borrowing. Now, you'll see it in all the newspapers, this gambling analogy. He really has bet the house on this strategy. Number 10 and number 11 think we've got to go for growth, no if, no buts. I think someone's quoted in the papers tomorrow saying you've got to go big or go home. So they've adopted this radical, bold and quite, dangerous potentially strategy of borrowing tens of billions to bankroll the biggest tax cuts in 50 years. Now, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are quite clear. They think there's no other option. We have got to be radical, be big if we're going to stop that sort of stagnant economy sliding into a deep recession and get growth back. And what's clear in the budget today is that they're happy with people earning big bucks, big amounts of money. They're relaxed about people getting quite rich if they think that means they will bring business and bring growth and bring more money to the country. So really, that's what this budget is about, being unashamedly pro-business and I guess pro-wealth too. But it is controversial. It needs to pay off, and it needs to pay off quickly ahead of the next election. And you're right, lots of Tory backbenchers are kind of holding their breath and wondering, will this work or not tonight?
Yes, it has been labelled a gamble, something that the Chancellor has defended against and said that it isn't a gamble. Business groups have welcomed some of the sweeping changes. But could this gamble, even though the Chancellor says it isn't one, could it pay off, Susie?
Well, one of the gambles, just move it aside from the money for a moment and the fact he's just thrown it all on red, okay? That the fact is that there was an opinion poll out earlier this week that showed that 51% of everybody in Britain wanted to pay more tax. 46% of Conservative voters wanted to pay more tax. It is therefore a very bold Chancellor who decides, when he's faced with all these people who want to give him money, that he doesn't want any of it and he's going to give it all back again. And it also says today, I think there's a piece out in Opinion tonight that says 31% of self-employed people, a third almost, would vote Labour at the next general election. And what he has done here is that politically, again, leaving the money to one side, he's just handed Labour a massive open goal. They've got their Labour conference starting on Sunday, which I'm going to be at, and they're going to be cock-a-hoop, I would have thought, about this, because it's going to be very, very easy for them to look like the party of fiscal responsibility when you've got someone who's ignoring the voters, is ignoring his own voters, and he's ignoring some fairly basic maths. And the reason that, as Kate was saying, they're calling this a mini budget, even though it is very much a massive budget, really, is because if they called it a budget, they would have to open it up to analysis from independent financial experts to actually do some projections before they could publish it. And they didn't want to do that because the projections would all be really, really bad. So they've called it a mini budget. It's not a budget, so they don't have to have the analysis that would stop them doing a thing that any normal bank manager would say, you're doing what? No, you're not.
And very quickly, Kate, we're running out of time, but the world markets aren't keen either, are they? 37-year low against the dollar.
I mean, it's clear, isn't it? The pound did slump today. It's clear, I think, that the markets are wobbling a bit at the kind of, I guess, audacity or just scale of today's budget. We'll see where that settles. I was going to say, I don't think I've ever met anybody that wants to pay more tax voluntarily, but that's probably a conversation for another day.
We are going to take a break at that point. But there must be people that want to pay more tax because they took part in a survey. Isn't that right, Susie?
Right, exactly. It was quite good. I think it was the first time in history that it's the British Social Attitude Survey, which has been going for a very long time and is very well established. And it's the first time since it's been running, which I think is about 50 years or so since the war, that they actually found that more people wanted to pay more tax than didn't.
Very interesting. We shall take a break on that note. Do stay with us. Coming up, the new king gets back to work, but what's on his agenda? We will be discussing that next. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Susie Boniface and Kate Ferguson. There they are. Let's take a look at the Mail. We were talking about certain viewpoints criticising Kwesi Kwarteng's mini-budget. But the Mail, their headline, at last, a true Tory budget. They seem to be in favour of everything that the Chancellor has announced today. Susie.
Yeah, not a single word of negativity on the front page there. Nothing about the fact the pound slumped. Nothing about the fact the markets aren't too chuffed. Nothing about the fairly reasoned analysis that it means that some inflations can be baked into the system. And it's, the widest read mass market newspaper in the country. And a lot of people who only read that are only going to see that is a true Tory budget. And that might backfire, because if the budget gamble doesn't pay off, then it's going to look like a true Tory cock-up, won't it? But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, the fundamental thing they're banking on, if you like, pardon the pun, is that if they can attract big money bankers from other financial centres like New York, for example, or Frankfurt, and come and live in London, that somehow the money they are now allowed to make in bonuses will end up in the pocket of a bus driver in Wigan. And that's all well and good if you think that a banker who's worked in Frankfurt and New York and is now based in London is going to be paying his taxes in London as opposed to paying them offshore, which is exactly what happened when Rishi Sunak was an international banker, when Sajid Javid was an international banker, and when Jacob Rees-Mogg was an international banker. They put all this stuff offshore because they're in multi-jurisdictional employment. That's the best way of doing things. And do you think that they're going to be sending their children to the local state school and therefore encouraging state funding that improves the schools for everybody else in that area? Or do you think they're sending their children to a private school that has charitable tax status and is therefore, running a bit of a business and is a bit of a fraud, frankly? No, the fact that if you're attracting lots of bankers with lots of cash, and if you're earning more than £155,000 a year, are you going to spend all of it in the UK? Is it all going on businesses who pay all their tax in the UK? Are you all going to be taking the bus? Are you all going to be using the trains? Are you all going to be buying only British cars? It doesn't work that way. That's just not how it's going to work out at all.
Let us move on from the mini budget, Kate, only because of time, and just have a look at the Telegraph. King Charles back to work. He's photographed there at his desk, working away.
Yeah, it's a lovely photo, isn't it? This is a photo taken of Charles, I think a few days ago, but it's signalling, isn't it, that he's, after the period of national mourning, the death of his mother, and obviously he's now our king, that he's going back to work. So I think, this big budget story today is obviously gobbling up all the headlines, but we're also, so much has happened in the past couple of weeks. We're in a new reign, a new era of King Charles. So I think all eyes also will be on that, what he does with the role. And do we see a big change between him and the late Queen Elizabeth? So, yeah, Prince Charles is back to work, as is, Kwasi Kwarteng and the government. Although actually they're off now. They're back on Tory party recess soon. So,
yes,
recess.
Yes, and Susie, the article saying they're sitting at his desk in the 18th century room in Buckingham Palace with a photograph of his parents behind him. He's shown signing papers, Charles R, short for Charles Rex, his official signature as king.
Some very carefully arranged papers so that no one could see anything that might be remotely too sensitive in there. It looks insanely posed, that red box. And in fact, in there is a rolled up piece of parchment tied in blue ribbon, as though someone's been sending him missives by owl. It's a bit ridiculous. Can they still not send the man an email?